Well, I can finally say this legitimately in a class. Dave's not here. I don't know who remembers that, but a couple of old guys on the left over here. Unfortunately, David asked me a question a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't been able to get around to answering the question until now. And I'm going to, even though Dave's not here. David asked me after class about 2 weeks ago or so, that picture that I had, what was that big mound of dirt? Well, we talked about it and what it is, and then we went to this next slide to show what they'd been founding in that area. So whereas this big mound of dirt was the northern mound of ancient Babylonian capital city, and this was parts of it that they have excavated. The question had to do with, why was that big mound of dirt there? Was it just a big mound of dirt? And, what does it mean? So I'm going to just spend about 3 or 4 minutes this morning explaining that in case other people have that kind of question. The dirt piles that you see here, and we're going to see some other examples, are called tells. T-E-L. Sometimes they have 2 L's, but most of the time it's just T-E-L. And a tell is nothing more than a big mound of dirt that has a lot of different layers down inside of it that archaeologists can dig down and find stuff. And what they find are layers and layers of old cities, so that over time a city would build up in a certain spot, either dissipate on their own or be conquered. The next group of people would come in, they would use some of the materials, tear down some of what was there, either because of the war, because they were dilapidated, fill it in. They would have a little bit higher layer, and at that point they would put their civilization on top, and then this would repeat itself over hundreds of years or more until you finally have quite a mound of dirt. In the case of Babylonia, this particular one, I'm not sure whether or not that was multiple layers as much as it was one big mound from the giant city that was there, because their walls were extremely tall anyway. This here is an example of some other tells. They're dotted all over the Middle East in places and other parts of the world, but they're well known in the Near East and Middle East areas. This particular one here is a tell that's been partially excavated at what's called Beersheba. This is Tell Beersheba. Tell Beersheba is talked about as early as Genesis chapter 21, and it's mentioned 33 different times in the Bible, and that's over quite an expanse of years. Beersheba was the place where Abraham had made a covenant with the Philistine king Abimelech. So, for all we know, we may find things there from either the king or from Abraham or whatever. This is a real city that existed in the Bible. Like I said, they're not just mounds of dirt. They're collapsed civilizations as they've been changed and conquered over the years, in centuries. Finally, in the end, they're normally left by the last people that live there, and as the winds blow and whatever happens, they get totally covered up, and then they look just like a big mound of dirt. And some of them, they know what the city is. Some of them, they don't know for sure what the city is, but their job is to go through and find the artifacts and find all the different clues and stuff to try to figure out what that mound is and who had lived there layer by layer in the distant past. This is an example of part of the layers of a tell that they've dug up, and you can see, first of all, there are two different floors. Okay, one would be the bottom one would be from an earlier civilization, and the next one would be from one that happened after that. And there's pottery layers, and there's all these different layers in there that they have to figure out. This is Tel Gezer. It was occupied for over a period of over 3,000 years total, and it has 21 different layers in it. Two of the layers you can see here labeled are bottom left corner is a city that was Israelite, and then up a little farther you can see there was a Canaanite city, and there's lots of other ones in there. That's the only ones that this picture is showing, but it has lots of layers. One civilization is built on top of another over time. Gezer itself, this particular tell, is mentioned 14 different times in the Bible. They figure that its first civilization was probably the Canaanites, and one of the reasons why is they know what the Canaanite practices were as far as their idolatry, and part of what they did was infant sacrifice, and they've seen evidence of that in the baby bones and how they were handled on that layer. Modern archaeologists dig down into a tell to find all of these layers, and the artifacts they find give clues to who lived there, when they lived, how old the site is, what kind of society existed in the various layers. There are many items that are found in the tells that kind of give them those clues. There's lots of times they find, the footings, like we talked about, and the wall, the outlines of walls. Sometimes they're raised a little bit. Sometimes they can just see where the wall foundations and footings were. But they also find such things as weapons and agricultural tools and things like that. But one of the items that is actually, they claim one of the more important things that they find is pottery. And over the past few centuries, pottery from these various periods have been found in these tells, and they're able to give more accurate dates as to who lived there and when. For instance, these are some pictures on the top left. These are whole pieces that have been found, but as you look to the right, you can see this is how a lot of times the pieces are found. They're just mixed in with the dirt. The next civilization doesn't care about the other people's plates, especially if they're broken, so they become part of the landscape and the footings underneath the floors or whatever. And then finally they can take those pieces on the bottom there, a lot of times, and glue them together and find out what the shape is, what the material is, what the design, if they can find paintings and drawings on them, and they can date them as certain centuries BC, and they can find out whether or not they were more of a Greek period or the Roman period or whatever, because that is things that happen with pottery over time. For instance, here's a modern example so that you can see what we mean. Who knows what kind of plate that would be and what time period it would be from?
1800?
Just a minute. That's a good guess. I didn't hear what you said, though.
What?
I didn't hear what you said.
1800?
Okay. What about this one? Everybody ought to know this one. Okay? So the first one there is Wedgwood from the middle 1800s. And the second one, of course, is Corel, which many of us have in our cupboards right now. All right? Those are only like 100 years apart, and yet the pottery has changed quite a little bit. So if you went to a place and started digging up and you found Wedgwood, you know that it probably wouldn't have been before the mid-1800s. But it could be after that, simply because after that, people still owned it. But if you found Corel, you know that could not be from the 1800s, because those designs, the materials weren't found until the middle 1960s, middle 1900s, and this pattern right here wasn't even put on plates until about 1960. So you would know that that civilization was no older than 1960. So these are some of the ways that they go through tells to tell what's going on and that sort of thing. All right, enough on that. Today we're going to talk about Edom and Petra. So what we have in Edom and in association with that, the city of Petra, we've got the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Obadiah, all prophesying against those places. And Petra is basically the main city in Edom. So I may use the word Petra, I may use the word Edom, but I kind of mean the same thing for the most part. And they prophesied over a 150-year period of time. So these guys, again, for the most part, didn't know each other, but they basically said the same things about what was going to happen to those cities. Collectively, their prophecies drew a total picture of what happened. Here are some of the prophecies that are contained in those books, and they're numerous. Israel would conquer and eventually possess the land. Edom's curse would result from treacherous dealings with Israel. The land of Edom and its cities would become waste and desolate. Evidence of Edom's rulers would vanish. That's an important one. Thorns and thistles will thrive where the towns are ruined. Birds, wild animals would inhabit the place. Edom would cease as a nation, become desolate, never be populated again, be conquered by heathens. Edom would have a bloody history and no longer be a trade center. This is an important one also, because we're going to see just how important in the ancient world Edom was to trade throughout the whole Western and even Far Eastern world. And then when people would come later, the Bible says that they would be astonished at what they find. And I think you'll see that here in a minute. And in ancient times, Edom was a large area of land that was really kind of a safe haven, especially Petra. This is the parts of the land of Edom. You can see that the mountains are jagged, they're high, they're steep. So it was more or less protected from the outside world, which was a good place. The capital city, Petra, was even better than that. High cliffs all the way around it, and this was the only entrance point. This was the only way you could get into it. And you can see the man on the horse in there. You can't get an enemy army of any size coming through there in any mass. They can't tear down that like they could a door in front of most cities, and it was easily defend. I mean, you'd just be slaughtering people, and you'd be mounting up inside that city, and they couldn't get in the city. So it was a pretty secure place. Because of this, Petra was kind of in its unique location, and because of its ability to be easily defended, became an important trade station, and as a result, it got very, very rich. It was a safe haven also for anybody who was a trader or simply needed a place to rest before they continued on to their next destination. Originally, Petra was populated by what we would call Edomites, and it was the main city, of course, of Edom. Then later, quite a bit later, between the 4th and the 2nd centuries BC, there was another nomadic tribe called the Nabateans, and they're said to have inhabited Petra during that particular period of time. Now, remember that the time period of the 4th century to the 2nd century BC are when? in relation to the Bible?
You mean in between?
Between Malachi and Matthew. They're in that 400-year gap, okay, is when that other group of nomads took over that city. But where did Edom originate? Well, so far, this is not true of every city, but so far, where is every one of the cities that we talked about that got torn down, where have they originated from? Where in the Bible? Genesis. Yeah, Genesis. And there's no exception to this one. In 2 Kings, Edom is mentioned at the time of Uzziah, king of Judah, and Isaiah 42 uses the term S-E-L-A, Selah, instead of Edom. It's another word that they use for Edom instead. So what we find the original, where we originally find Edom in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 36, where it says, Esau took his wives and sons and daughters and all the members of his household, as well as his livestock and all his other animals and all the goods he had acquired in Canaan, and moved to the land some distance from his brother Jacob. So, of course, we remember that Jacob and Esau were brothers. They were both the sons of Isaac. Their possessions were too great for them to remain there. The land where they were staying could not support them both because of their livestock. So Esau, in other words, that is Edom, and it says that, actually puts that in parentheses in, I think, most, if not all, translations, settled in the hill country of that place we just mentioned, S-E-I-R, Seir. Okay? So that is the initiation, so to speak, in the Bible of the land of Edom. And it was populated by people that were the sons of Esau. We know the story of Abraham's grandsons, Jacob and Esau. In fact, this is a little chart I've used in other classes before. We remember that Abraham was the father of Isaac, and then Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. And we can go all the way down farther to Jacob having been the father of the 12 tribes, or his 12 sons, and eventually that goes out through the rest of the Bible when they travel out in the wilderness and then settle into Israel. We'll talk a teeny bit about that more later. But Esau, on the other hand, goes in, and their people become the Edomites, which is basically, and we'll see this on a map in a minute, south of where the 12 tribes end up in Israel. So they're still semi-neighbors, not too far away from each other. We know that there was a conflict between the two brothers, that Jacob tricked his dad into giving him the birthright and the inheritance, so to speak. When Esau found out that he had been tricked and traded it all for a pot of stew, he was pretty upset, and the brothers didn't get along for a very, very long time. Then we see in Genesis chapter 32 that at one point Jacob decides to go back to his brother Esau, try to make amends, and they actually have a happy ending to that particular story between the two brothers. They actually do get along again. But the nations did not, as we're going to see. As we see in Genesis chapter 36, Esau had moved south into the land of Seir, or later on known as Edom. Edom is mentioned 82 times in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and it is in 21 different books. So it is a rather important city, even in the Bible. One prominent place is the book of Numbers. One time, roughly 500 years after Abraham, when Israel they were following the cloud by day and the fire by night when they were on their 40-year pilgrimage as kind of their judgment walk through the wilderness. They needed to pass through the land of Edom. Now keep in mind that Israel and the Edomites were related through their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau, who had supposedly made up. In other words, the Edomites and the Hebrews were kind of distant cousins of each other. But it says in Numbers chapter 20, But Edom answered, in other words, Israel had made a request of passing through their country. You may not pass through here. If you try, we will march out and attack you with the sword. The Israelites replied, we will go, they're pleading their case. We will go along the main road, and if we or our livestock drink even so much as water, we will pay you for it. We will only pass through on foot, nothing else. Again, the Edomites answered, you may not pass through. Then the Edomites came out against them with a large, powerful army. They were going to fight them if they tried to even pass through their land at all. This is the trade route that we were talking about. This is a couple of maps I found. Now, if you look at the one at the left, you'll see Edom, but you don't see Petra on it. I was going to put that dot on there, and I forgot. But Petra is actually in that oval on the left that says Edom, the city of Petra. And then that, you can see the arrow going over to the smaller orange oval on the right. That is where Edom actually belongs. So you can see the relationship between where the wilderness would be south of Edom and into the Edom area, and then Israel, of course, is up there against the Mediterranean Sea. Once they went through the wilderness, they went north beyond the Dead Sea, which you see in that smaller map on the left. The Dead Sea is the one at the bottom, the long blue piece, and they crossed the Jordan River into Israel. Where they were going to stay, into Palestine, in the Canaanite area. So that gives you an idea of where the areas are. And then if you look at the right map, those red, blue, and black lines are the trade routes. And you can see that Petra is pretty much in the center of all that. The blue lines, north to south, basically go from the Mediterranean Sea area, where you can cross the sea and go over, and then they go down either on the green line or the blue line, either one, into what would be modern day Saudi Arabia. And of course, the trade route by water would go by the green line down and then over into the Far East, which would be like China and India. And so Petra was passed through by a lot of people trading from China and India, going up into that area and then getting on a boat and going across the Mediterranean Sea to other places like Spain and whatever was over there at the time. I don't even remember right now. And then the red route is the land route that would go through, say, Damascus in the north, and go east to west. And that east route, I can't read it right now, but it seems like it says say it again? Silk Road, yeah. And I think that went, if I remember, even up through like Russia. Some of the TV. Persia for sure, yeah. And then, of course, across the Mediterranean. So it doesn't maybe look that big a deal, but Petra was a big deal. It was a huge deal, all right? And people that wanted to take stuff from the east and bring it to the west, or north to the south, or vice versa, usually did a lot of their trading in Petra itself. This trade route existed for hundreds of years. They say very probable from 1900 BC to at least 600 BC. So we're talking about this was one huge important place. Considering the wealth and the importance of Edom at the time, these Old Testament prophets were going out on a limb when they made the predictions that they did. Okay? Josh McDowell, in one of his books, states that Edom was about the size of New Jersey. Okay? So it was a good-sized place. And Petra was its most important city. But much more important, it was way more important than New Jersey in the ancient world. These predictions would be like saying that New Jersey, think about the state of New Jersey, pretty important, but not as important at the time of Petra and Edom itself back then, that saying that New Jersey would become desolate and that it would be invaded by men from the east and from across the sea and from the north, and then be conquered, and then never be re-inhabited ever again. Okay? And that Edom would become desolate and would be infested with wild animals, and nobody would believe it when they came and looked at the city. But this is exactly what happened to Edom and the city of Petra after God's prophets made their predictions. Now, it's not the same as what happened, say, to Babylon and Assyria, especially Assyria. It happened overnight. Or was it Babylon? One of the two of them happened overnight. I mean, it basically collapsed instantly. There's no timeline given by God here. And this one happens over a very long period of time because God didn't put a timeline on it. So it's a little more difficult for historians to make that connection, especially if they don't believe that what the Bible prophets are trying to tell, that this came from God and that it would actually happen. First of all, it says that Israel would conquer and eventually possess the land in Obadiah and in Ezekiel. During the days of 1st and 2nd Kings, Israel and Edom often antagonized each other, sometimes bitterly. Israel dominated Edom at times, yet Edom never totally surrendered its independence to Israel. Edom did finally gain total independence again during the time of Ahaz in 2 Chronicles chapter 28. And it was during that period of Edom's independence that the prophets announced that Israel would finally possess the land of Edom. And it took quite a few more years, but finally, in around 160 to 200 BC, that happened. It came true. Jewish forces took the land of Edom for the last time during that particular period. At that time, the Jewish nation forced all the Edomites, the men, to become circumcised. So all of a sudden, there's less distinguishing between the two races. And they were also placed under Jewish rule and eventually were merged into the Jewish state. So there was intermarrying going on, and eventually, over time, because of that and the Edomite nation becoming mixed with other nations, even other than Israel, the Edomite nation finally disappeared totally, and they no longer exist today. You can't trace yourself back to being an Edomite today. But there was a person that could supposedly trace his way back, and this is noted by Josephus, which is a historical writer back just after the time of Jesus, wrote at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, and wrote a lot of history of what the Jewish people went through. He says that Herod the Great, of course, was the father of an Idumean, a.k.a. a Edomite. So Herod the Great's father was an Edomite, which made Herod the Great an Edomite, or an Idumean, and he prided himself with that, and he tried to make it out so that he was part Jewish, so that he would get along with the Jewish people and he could be their ruler, which the Jewish people really kind of liked in a way, because he built them a big temple, Herod's temple, just before the time of Jesus, but there was still problems between the Herods and the Jewish people at that time, during the time of Jesus. We also remember that it's interesting to note that we find Herod, who is a descendant of Esau, and the person, we find Herod, who is a descendant of Esau, attempting to kill off the seed of the woman that had finally come through Jacob's lineage. In other words, not only do we go through the 12 tribes and on the other side to the Edomites, we go through Jesus, and we go finally down to Herod the Great on the other side. And just like we saw all the way from Genesis chapter 3 in the original your seed against my seed sort of thing, and I'm going to crush your heel's going to get crushed, but I'm going to crush your head, talking to Satan. We see a lot of those seed of the serpent, seed of the woman stories throughout the Bible, where here's one that's not really brought out totally in the Bible, but you can actually kind of draw that conclusion, because what was Herod the Great trying to do? He was trying to kill the Son of God when he killed all the people, just like the Pharaoh in Exodus did, and just like so many others had tried to do. So it's part of that same kind of story that we see happening over and over and over again. Edom, the land and the cities, it says, would become waste and desolate in Jeremiah and in Ezekiel. In fact, Isaiah... Oh, I was going to read this. This is simply the account of where Herod says he's going to go and kill all the children because of what the wise men had told him. But this is the one from Jeremiah and Ezekiel. First of all, from generation to generation, it will lie desolate. No one will ever pass through it again. And in Jeremiah it says, no one will live there, no man will dwell in it. This was a big city. This was a big place. Lots of people, lots of travelers. Everybody knew where it was. Okay? I will lay it waste. And Ezekiel finally says, I will make Mount Seir a desolate waste and cut off from all who come and go. Now, while the physical dirt and the rocks and all that that form the ancient Edom still remain, the Edomite people and the cities no longer exist. As late as the time of the Herods, so this would be 100 BC up until about the time of Jesus or after, so probably sometime in the early part, which would be just before Jesus, Edom still could have enough people to raise a small army. But soon afterwards, the numbers, the numerous and thickly populated towns and cities, and the great caravans that traveled her highways started to totally disappear. It became more like a ghost town, and we're going to see what that ghost town looks like in a minute. Only it's a huge ghost town. Edom's demise did not happen in the same manner as we said, like Nineveh, that suddenly went into obscurity. Edom's demise happened gradually over time, over hundreds of years actually. And that is how the Old Testament prophets predicted that would happen, and historically that's actually what took place and what we can see. It was then that the Israelites and the Edomite people slowly began to mesh together totally, so that they were the Edomites were assimilated into the other nations. The Romans controlled Edom during the 2nd century A.D., and then over time the Roman government kind of basically had stole all of Edom's money, so that they were no longer rich either. After that, desert marauders, bandits, and so to speak, made life on the border cities of that area more difficult. Even the early so-called Christians heavily taxed the people of that area just after the time of Jesus. They taxed people that traded in that area in order to complete their own religious building projects, like they did, some of the early churches and that sort of thing, as they got away from Christianity and they wanted to build coliseums and stuff. They would tax people, so they were partially to blame for what happened to Edom also. So instead of paying the high taxes, these traders eventually over time decided to divert their trade routes away from Eden. Then by the 7th century AD, after Jesus, 700 years after Jesus, 600 years after Jesus, Muslim armies occupied that region. One historian states that commerce dwindled, agriculture declined, and the people of the land began to drift away and seek their livelihoods other places. Cities that depended on caravan trade ceased to exist, and the region was eventually totally abandoned. One of the other things it says is that spectators would be astonished. One of the places it says that is Jeremiah chapter 49. Edom will become a horror, and a waste. Everyone who passes by will be appalled and will hiss at its defeat. It was not until the 1800s AD that finally someone from the West returned to Petra and lived to tell about it, because that was such a radical Muslim area throughout the previous centuries, actually, that no one could get in there. There's a guy named Burckhardt. John Burckhardt was a Swiss traveler, an explorer, and a bunch of other little things by his name. He gained access to it, that particular region, in 1812 because he disguised himself as a Muslim. So you can see him as he originally was, what he looked like. They've got drawings of what he looked like when he went into that area so that he could pass as a Muslim. And then you can, like you can with a lot of these other things, buy a cup on Amazon, a mug on Amazon, $12.50, and get his picture on it. I don't know why anybody would want that one, but that just came up by accident. For several hundred years, there had been rumors of an ancient city in the desert, and Burckhardt wanted to go and find out. So he went and found the lost city that time had forgotten. He wrote that it must have once been a thickly populated area because there were traces of many towns and villages, but it was now all desert. At that time, all future explorers would become amazed by the ruins of the once marvelous cities. Petra city was, I looked it up, and it was about, it was huge. It was like the size of Manhattan, just the city of Petra itself. Okay, so we're not talking about some little mound of dirt like some of these other places. It was huge. Some say it was as big as 100 square miles, which would mean it could be like 10 miles by 10 miles, or some other variation depending on what the shape was. Ezekiel, though, said, I will turn your towns into ruins, and you will be desolate. Then you will know that I am the Lord. And later on he says, I will make you, talking about Edom, desolate forever. Your towns will not be inhabited, and you will know that I am the Lord. Not only did the prophets correctly predict the desolation of Edom, they also portrayed the extent to which it would happen. Ezekiel chapter 25 says that the desolation would stretch from a city called Teman to a city called Danaan. Now, Danaan is in the north, and Teman is in the south, I think, if I remember right. When Burckhardt entered, the guy from before there, entered Edom, he reported that Teman, which is now known as M-A-apostrophe-A-N, Ma'an, was the only current populated city. Okay, so that was the only one that survived, and the Bible says that from here to here. It doesn't say what happened to that city in the south. It says from that city to the other city, it would be destroyed. Well, that's the only city from that ancient area that has survived. In fact, it's quite a thriving town today. It's in the very, very south of Edom, ancient Edom, where it used to stand. This is it today, like I just said. And it was this city which Ezekiel said would be the only one that would not be destroyed. There would also be, according to the prophets, the vanishment of all of the Edomite rulers. So in other words, they're saying that anybody that ruled over Edom would not be remembered. Now, if you remember right, that prediction was not made against someone like Egypt. We know all the pharaohs. But here, we don't even know who the rulers were back then. And it's not for lack of trying, as we're going to see in a minute. It says, your nobles, there is no one there to call it kingdom, and all of its princes will be nothing. The kings of Edom shared a common goal with the pharaohs that were of Egypt. They both wanted to be remembered, and long after their death, in fact, and both had elaborate ways of trying to ensure that their remains and their names would be preserved. The pharaohs were mummified and put in pyramids, but God never told the Egyptians that their records of their kings would vanish, but he did the Edomites. In fact, we know not only the names of the pharaohs, we know their dynasties, we know a lot about them. This is not true of Edom. Even though it is obvious that they did everything that they could, God would not, God said that they would not, and he was right. These are the kinds of tombs that you see there, and we're going to see more of them in a minute. These were not things that were built on top of each other with big blocks, which was quite a feat. These are carved right out of the mountain. And then into the mountain, you can walk in there. Well, you can't walk in a lot of them nowadays because they're blocked off. But you walk in there, and there's vast, the mountain is hollowed out. So there's big rooms back in there. And those were used for a lot of things, but a lot of them were used for the tombs and the sanctuaries of dead rich people and pharaohs, or not pharaohs, but kings of the area. You might remember this particular one from Indiana and the Last Crusade. This is what's known as the now I can't remember. It's in my notes and I don't remember. What's this one called? Do you remember? That building behind them. That Treasury building. Yeah, that's the most famous one. It's called the Treasury. And this particular scene was taken right in front of the Treasury, and a lot of that was filmed over in that area. That particular movie was filmed there. These are some more of the temple areas built into the rocks. On the upper left, if you can tell, you can see the huge, massive theater that they had in the area, all cut out of the rock. And then in the middle at the top, you see their main temple, which much of it still stands, not the whole thing, but they know how big it was, they know where it was, etc. So they know quite a bit about that part. Isaiah says her nobles will have nothing there to be called a kingdom. And he goes on to say that all her princes will go away. And when Edom and Petra were rediscovered in the 1800s, adventurers and scientists that came found only shells of the tombs and that once held these remains of the rulers, but nothing inside at all. It was all gone. And the names that might have been there, either on the front or wherever, the sands had worn them off, and there was no wording whatsoever. So basically, God totally erased the memory of that people, just like He had said. Isaiah chapter 34. It says, "The desert owl and the screech owl will possess it. The great owl and the raven will nest there. God will stretch out over Edom, and the measuring line of chaos and the plumb line of destruction. Thorns will overrun her, citadels, nettles and brambles, her strongholds. She will become the haunt of jackals and the home of owls. Desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and the wild goats will bleat to each other. In other words, lots and lots of wild animals and overgrowth, which is basically what happened. Written records of visitors that have come to Petra in the early days kind of confirm this, that it was an inhospitable place. John Wilson, for instance, visited Petra in the 1940s, and this is what he had to say. The creeping things which are found in the ruins of Petra are so numerous that it may be characteristically spoken of as a habitation of dragons. We caught scores of lizards and chameleons and centipedes and scorpions in the space of a few minutes. And he goes on to say that among the birds we noticed are the eagle, the ostrich, the kite, the hawk, the owl, etc., which is all what the Old Testament prophets said. Others have stated a wide variety of birds and prey that are in that area, and that they are considerably numerous. Wild animals thickly populate the region, and Wilson goes on to write that he found large groups of wild boar, goats, jackal, lynx, hyenas, leopard, and even lions. What did Obadiah say? Obadiah chapter 1, this is partly verse 10 and verse 18. Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. There will be no survivor from the house of Esau. And after 1,000 years of successful commerce and trade, there's no more Edom left anywhere. Now it's a tourist attraction where people come in and they can spend, I think I looked it up, says like $70 a day. You can go in and walk around, take some pictures. We can ask ourselves, like we have on any of the rest of these, is this accidental history that happened over time, or is this God's wrath being fulfilled over time in a way that he predicted that it would? And I think it's for everybody to decide that. But I think the evidence kind of strong that what God said happened. Yes?
My sister and brother-in-law went to Petra.
I want to go. I
They say
do.
it's quite interesting. You can take an air-conditioned bus out, but you still have to walk through that real narrow thing.
Yeah.
And that's where the frustration comes, because there's no vehicles in there.
Nope.
When you're gonna walk around in there, you have to walk.
Well, you can ride camels and donkeys, but they tell you don't do it.
Yeah. But
They say you're going to get ripped off.
They walked for about half a day through there.
Yep.
And they said, we just saw a small part of it because you can only walk so far, and it goes on and on and on and on. But one of the guides there told them that they figured that it had at least 30,000 people there, because they could see where a lot of the houses and everything were still, but they're
Yep.
all empty.
Yep. Yeah, you can buy a 3-day pass too. And I know somebody else that has been there. In fact, trying to remember who would know him. There's people here who would know him, but I won't mention it. And he's told me a little bit about it. So it's a place you can visit. It's a place I think I'd like to, but I don't think I probably ever will get the chance. Any other questions or comments? All right, thanks.